Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Ossa Fisher. Ossa is the president of Aurora, a public company that provides self-driving technology for safe, accessible, and efficient transportation, with a market cap of close to $7 billion. Prior to Aurora, Ossa spent over 20 years at innovative technology companies in high-growth industries, serving in both strategic and operational functions. Most recently, she served as president and COO of Istation, a leading education technology provider serving millions of students across the United States. Prior to Istation, Ossa served as Senior Vice President of Strategy and Analytics at the dominant dating company Match Group, known for such brands as Match.com and Tinder. In addition, she spent almost a decade at global consulting firm Bain Co, ultimately serving as a partner in the technology, media, and telecom practice. She began her career as an investment banking analyst at Goldman Sachs. Ossa also serves on the board of directors for Instructure, a public edtech company serving over 30 million users, and Hometown Ticketing, a digital ticketing company. Ossa is a member of the Yale Alumni Association Board of Governors and has a bachelor's in economics from Yale University, an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a master's in education from Stanford Graduate School of Education. She holds both Swedish and American citizenship and is fluent in both Swedish and English, and she's also married with 2 teenage daughters. Ossa, I'm so excited. Welcome to the podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Of course. So first, set the scene. Are you based in Dallas, or where are you right now? Where are you based typically?
Yes, right now I am in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, amazing. So, Ossa, I'm so excited for this. And as you know, what I love to do is go all the way to the beginning. And you especially have a compelling childhood because I know you moved from Sweden to the States, I think when you were about 4 years old. So first, tell me about your childhood. Tell me about that, maybe that transition to the States, and ultimately, what type of kid were you?
Yeah. So I was born Åsa Gunilla Fredriksson, about as Swedish of a name as you can get. And my parents changed my name to Ossa when we moved to Sweden moved to America at the age of 4 for me. My sister was 6. And the reason we moved is because my dad, he has a PhD in telecommunications, and he was recruited into what's now very widely known as Silicon Valley, and ultimately caught the entrepreneurship bug, as one does in Northern California, and started his own company. And so he ran a company as founder and CEO for 20 years, which really then inspired me in many ways. Just the power that technology has to change the world, the power that business has to really deliver value, and of course that startup journey, because it's not all up and to the right. And so just witnessing really my parents go through that entire journey over those decades together shaped a lot of how I look at the world today.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a kid, did you love school? Ultimately, you went to Yale, right? Not a bad school at all. I imagine that translated to being a really excellent student, but did you like school?
Yes, I've often said that if school paid the bills, I would be a forever student. I've always enjoyed learning and really look forward, honestly, to the start of the school year every single year.
Oh, I love that. What were some of your favorite subjects back then?
In elementary school, I really enjoyed math. I think that was one of my highlights. English, I've always enjoyed reading, and then I also oddly like the arts. I really like the multidisciplinary nature of elementary school.
Okay, I love that. As you got older and as you started to maybe gain a bit of clarity of this is where I could see myself, did your dad influence you in terms of I should be, my own boss, my own founder one day? Did you ever have that thought?
I don't know if they pushed us in that direction. I think definitely being from Sweden and an immigrant mindset, had I wanted to major in philosophy or psychology, I'm not sure they would have paid the tuition. So it was very clear, from a young age that it was going to be business or engineering. And at Yale, which I felt very lucky and honored to get into and attend, business is really translated into economics from a liberal arts perspective. And engineering at the time was computer science. And so my freshman year, I took electives in both and enjoyed both, but definitely was drawn to economics because of that multidisciplinary nature, right? It's history, it's math, it's sociology, it's anthropology, it's statistics. It's really so many things in one that I just kept kind of clawing at it and learning more and realizing that's where my passion was.
Yeah. And Osa, I'm so curious because especially at Stanford, right? And that's what I can essentially use my experience from. It's very common to be around students who are going down the common path, right? Whether that's consulting, that's banking, maybe go work at as a software engineer at a big tech company. And so you ultimately went down one of those routes in terms of banking. For you, when you look back, was it more fed by the outside noise, or was that something that you ultimately saw for yourself and you were excited about that path?
I was very excited. I wanted to do what I thought was one of the hardest, most challenging things out of undergrad that I could. And
Yeah.
investment banking at Wall Street, especially at Goldman, was kind of the top of that bar. I'll also say my parents did a very good job helping me through college, but after that, they basically said I was done. And so I graduated from college with, I think, $1,000 in my bank account. And so I desperately needed a job that would also pay the bills. And Goldman hit both. But really, I was super super excited when I got that offer and could not wait to start.
How was that transition for you, going from Yale, maybe more support from your parents, to being like, okay, I'm a real adult now? Like, what did that transition look like for you?
It probably wasn't as overnight as I would have hoped it would be. But this was Goldman back during what I would call the first tech bubble. I joined Goldman in 1999, and within weeks of finishing my training program, I was put on the road doing a road show for our first IPO, and really traveled the world for that, and did everything. The Liar's Poker book shares, from sleeping under my desk to up all hours, and doing deals that ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And so it was everything that I'd hoped for it to be, and more. And really what I remember most is the intensity of it and just the sheer learning. I learned so much during that stage in my life. It was really like a second college education in many ways.
Yeah. Ultimately, what made you say, okay, I'm ready for my next step? And it seems like right after you ended up going to Bain, which is the consulting path, and getting a whole new world into that. Yeah, talk me through that transition and what led to that.
Yeah, it wasn't nearly as linear as you make it out to be. So back in the day, Goldman had sort of a pre-MBA analyst program, and that's what I was in. And so I knew I was fortunate enough to get 3 years there, two in investment banking and one in equity capital markets. And I was applying to business school after that. I actually wrote all of my business school essays about entering the not-for-profit space. I wanted to do something that felt mission driven, and really making sure that I spent my time making the world just a little bit better. And I remember my essay on what do you want to be when you grow up, basically. And I thought it would be very cool to be president of the World Bank in Washington D.C. And anyway, I was very fortunate. Landed at Stanford in their public management program. Also, because my focus was on the not-for-profit space, I went ahead and sought a master's in education as well. And then was lucky enough to land my dream job again, second time over, and had a summer internship at the World Bank at the IFC. And so spent my summer investing in technology companies in Latin America that could not receive funding through other measures. And in good news and bad, I learned a lot, but also became somewhat disillusioned with the pace of how things worked at the bank. Things that we would do in 24 hours at Goldman took 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 weeks at the bank. It was just a different lifestyle. And I was in
Wow.
my mid-20s and really wanted something that was maybe working at a faster pace. And so I came back to campus and I spoke to both my mentors at the ed school and my mentors at the business school. And every single one of them said, stay in the for-profit space for as long as you can, at least a little while longer, because you can always make that transition into the not-for-profit world at a later stage. It's difficult, more difficult to go the other direction. And so I did this. I'm in my second year now of business school, about to graduate, and I did what any wayward business school student does who doesn't really know what they want to do with their life. I joined consulting, and Bain was just an amazing fit for me. They did have, they still do have the Bridgespan arm, which is their not-for-profit group. But the thing that was amazing to me is how much I loved it. Bain, I was there for a decade, and I know we'll go into that next, but I definitely did not imagine that I would be there all the way through partner when I joined back in
Wow.
2004.
Okay, so going back a bit, right? Choosing to go
Mhm.
to business school. I think a lot of people, at least, around me currently, are thinking, should I go to business school? Maybe, over time. I was just talking to someone where I think years ago, having that stamp was significant, right? And it showed this badge of credibility. I think there's maybe shifting around that where it still shows it, but it's not necessarily as striking. I'd love for you to just reflect on your experience and ultimately what did you take from business school that you think actually impacts who the leader you are today?
Yeah, I received that question even back then, and because it's an expensive proposition, and you also take 2 years out of your career journey in many ways, and really ultimately what it was for me was fast forwarding to when I'm 80 years old and I'm looking back at my life. Is business school, especially at a place like Stanford, going to be something that I'm going to regret, or something that I'm going to be proud of? And is it going to be a defining moment or series of years in my life? It was more on a hunt, but also in talking with other graduates, that I thought this was going to be a defining, memorable moment for me, much the way Yale had been, and that I wouldn't regret it regardless of what it did for my career or didn't do for my career. And I was very pleasantly surprised. I mean, Stanford, I'm still best friends with, well, many of the people that I met there, including my husband.
Great.
And because we both went there, are very much in touch. But I also learned so much and go back to those resources a tremendous amount. So it paid back in spades beyond financial measure.
Yeah. I'm wondering, do you find that you use that same decision metric in other aspects of your life, whether it's choosing, a career path, whatever it may be, similar to what you just said, whether it's like, will I be proud of this or will I regret it?
100%. It's really worked in my favor every time. I think it just distances ourselves a little bit from this near term, what feels like a life defining moment. If we actually fast forward to thinking about life in our entirety, and what's going to be meaningful and what's going to be trivial.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so you mentioned you end up going to Bain, doing consulting. You mentioned, what elements of it did you absolutely love? And you were like, okay, I didn't expect to love this, but this is actually really conducive to who I am.
Yeah, Bain for me fit like hand in glove.
Wow.
And the wonderful thing about consulting, especially as a relatively young professional, is you're parachuting into very different companies with pretty profound problems. They're not hiring a consulting firm for a problem they can solve on their own. And you're meeting new people all the time. I tend to be a bit of an extrovert, and learning from them, and hopefully they're learning from you. And there's a market problem solving part, at least of the Bain projects I worked on. I worked on a lot of strategy projects and a lot of go to market projects, and the customer, your clients, Microsoft, AT&T, Dell, Hewlett Packard, Metro PCS, even did some consumer products stuff with Kraft Foods and
Wow.
Albertsons, the grocery store. And so there was such a wide myriad of things to tackle that I never got bored. And I think the other thing that Bain had, and this is something that I really look for in every position I've taken on since, is is a fantastic culture. Like, Bain knew that people were its business, its product, and did such a good job with the care and feeding of me as an individual, and I in turn, stayed a whole decade, made it all the way to second year partner until I finally
Yeah.
felt like maybe I'd graduated.
And that path to second year partner, did that require self advocacy, right? Did that require being like, I deserve this? Or how did that ultimately look like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually think the self-advocacy might have backfired. I remember I made a pitch, I drew a graph about me and maternity, and this is pre-kids, and how I was going to have kids in a couple years, and so I needed to go really, really fast now, so that, when I needed to take a little bit more time, to take my kids to school, that I would have
Yeah.
reached a certain level within the organization. And I don't know how that was received, but I perceive it was not received very well. And in turn, what really did serve me well, one, obviously delivering results for clients and having those clients request that I serve on future cases. Same with my managers, et cetera. But leaning in and identifying problems and helping solve those for others, and really taking me out of the central picture. And that's really, I think, where a service oriented mindset and a servant leadership mindset finally started to, maybe it a little counterintuitive, but actually that's when the gifts kind of cycle back towards you, because that's the kind of behavior that frankly Bain rewarded, and I appreciate that now that I'm a bit more mature. I understand why that's the behavior that's rewarded.
Yeah. It's almost a similar notion of you're successful if your boss is successful, right? Like if you're helping
Mhm.
them, then ultimately, and it seems like at Bain, it could be that framework, but even your clients and your customers that are truly helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think the customers come first, and then hopefully you and your boss are aligned on that, and so you're both working to make your customer successful. And if that's what your focus is on, then yes, everybody wins.
Okay. So back to that point where you mentioned how you presented to, I guess, your boss, management, whoever may be, saying, I hope to have kids in this amount of years, and by that time I hope to be partner, if you will. I think as women, right, we have this biological clock that is not, it's talked about a fair amount. I'd love to know now that, as I said, you're a mother to two daughters, looking back, did you have a lot of angst around that? Like, was that something that consumed you? And now, given where you are, was that appropriate amount of angst? Like, how do you view it now?
Now I find it silly, but yes, lots of angst. I always knew I wanted to be a mother, always. And I grew up in a wonderful family, and I cherish my own parents, still do. But the real question was when. And as a funny aside, my husband and I had been married a few years. I was at Bain and he was working. We were in San Francisco and really enjoying our lives. And we went to his brother's college graduation, and that's a time of reflection in terms of what's next. And so we were
Yeah.
talking about what's next, and naturally it's children after you've been married a couple of years, but we weren't ready for that. We knew it would change our lives forever, and so we decided to go to Singapore instead. And Bain was amazing and facilitated that, and I worked out of Singapore on an awesome project, and he was able to work from Singapore with his company as well. And then we came back and decided now it is time. I will say, for all of that angst, it's never, ever a perfect time. And in fact, we probably waited too long. It was difficult for me to get pregnant. And I hear that story time and time again. And so, if I had to do it over again, would I do it differently? I don't know, because it worked out wonderfully. But I do know one thing for sure: my children are the most precious thing in my entire life. And I can't believe I had so much consternation going into it.
Yeah. And it seems like, and I've heard this before too. I think it's hard to hear it but actually believe it, which is you're never really ready, right? Like at the end of the day, you could hope to be a partner, hope to be able to have more freedom with work, but it seems like you just do it, and you work from it after the fact.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And there's never a perfect time, and it's never easy. And I do think young motherhood for a professional is probably one of the most difficult chapters that anyone needs to navigate, but it is so well worth it. And now that I do have two teenage daughters who are, you know, thriving and so much more independent than they ever could have been at the ages of 2 and 3. I see that as one of those amazing chapters too that I also will talk about
Yeah.
gladly on when I'm 80 years old.
I love it. So, before we get to Match Group, which I'm really excited about what attracted you, I want to know, how was that transition from becoming, almost an IC to a partner level and ultimately managing a team, managing people? Like what was almost natural to you and what required a great learning curve in that transition?
Yeah, I still remember this feedback, and I see the transition all the time in more junior professionals. So when you're very new at a company, yeah, an individual contributor, you're kind of looking up at the executive team as like a them, like they're doing stuff. Maybe I hear from them occasionally. I think they're probably pretty good at their job over there, but them are doing that, and I, me, am doing this. And somewhere along the line, you become part of the leadership team. It becomes a we're doing this. We're making this decision. We the company, are leaning this way. And somebody said to me, you need to go from an us, from a them to an us. And I don't remember exactly when in my Bain career it happened, but it wasn't that far in. It was maybe 3-4 years in, where you actually start feeling like you're part of the leadership team and responsible for communicating the decisions of the organization, and take it upon yourself that if you don't understand why a business decision was made, you actually have to figure it out so that you can communicate to the newer members of the team. That mental shift was probably the biggest one, and if I hadn't made it, I'm not sure I would have made it that long at Bain.
Wow. I love that. I love that piece of advice. What do you say though to people who, like, how dependent is it on the culture of the company, right? Where maybe executives, they, at the end of the day, they do have this divide and they feel like they are, they them rather than we us. Or do you think that's a fault of leadership?
I think you have to take responsibility for your own journey. So for me personally, which is what I can speak to, it was my own mental blockers that was preventing me from seeing the world from a leadership perspective, and seeing myself as more as a recipient of those decisions than a part of them. But certainly, if you feel like you have voiced concerns or disagreements with the leadership and they have ignored or not heard it, I mean, I would give it a couple times. I wouldn't do it on my first one, but then you might not be at the right company, right? Like that's
Yeah,
part of voting with your feet.
absolutely. And it seems like that piece of advice, if anything, it is the mental shift because it's almost how you show up in a meeting or in
Exactly.
with the team, and that ultimately changes, the performance even probably. So, okay, I love that. So what made you choose to leave Bain and go, join Match Group?
Yeah. So one, I'm pretty goal oriented, and I did definitely have a goal to hit partner. It happened actually, as even for what I said earlier, faster than even I would have expected. I was promoted at a relatively young age. Um, and the more senior I got, actually, the more removed I got from the actual problem solving. They leave that to more managers and things like that. And I love solving problems. It's a different kind of problem solving as a partner, by the way. But I also felt like 10 years at any institution is a really long time, and I wanted to put my money where my mouth was. Like, here I am giving all these executives, even CEOs, advice. Maybe I should give try it myself. So I think it was really that transition of wanting to step out of the consultancy recommender role into somebody who actually operates and executes.
Okay. And Match Group specifically, did they approach you? Or is that an industry that you were like, I'm fascinated by this? Or what ultimately led you there?
Yeah, so I remember this conversation really well. My husband and I have a ranch out in rural Texas. It's about a 2-hour drive. And I was talking to him about, like, I think my time at Bain feels like I'm ready for the next thing. And he was like, don't you dare trade Bain for a hypothetical. They have been so amazing and good for you. 3 offices, San Francisco to Singapore, back to San Francisco, Dallas again, a pretty fast promotion ladder, and then just lots of amazing, project opportunities. So he was like, slow your roll. And I said, well, I've been thinking about it a lot. And he's like, well, okay, well, what then would give you energy? And the first thing
Mm,
that was really important to me was a mission driven company, one that is trying to make the world a better place. Match, by the way, helps people fall in love. What better mission can you have than that? Second, I wanted it to be a smaller organization. And in my mind, that was a sub $5 billion market cap, only because I had seen the speed at which decisions are made. And I found a direct correlation between the size of the organization and speed of decision making. So smaller organization. I
okay.
absolutely wanted it to be tech enabled. Everything from my childhood to most of my projects, so not all of them, had really been for tech companies, and I saw just the inflection point that technology could create. And I wanted it. I needed to be Dallas based. We were in Dallas. We were raising children in Dallas, and many people don't know this, but Match Group is actually headquartered in Dallas. They're about 10 minutes from my house, and they've moved since then. They're still in Dallas, but I saw the logo every morning on my commute. And long story short, my husband's high school friend was a chief product officer in the Paris office, and I sent her my resume and said, would Match be interested in speaking with someone with my profile? It got forwarded. I met the CEO, Mandy Ginsburg. We're still really good friends to this day. We're actually in the same YPO chapter. She took my phone call, a meeting, and I pitched her the way I would pitch a Bain potential client on, like, have you thought about this, a customer segmentation strategy? Have you thought about this from a marketing perspective? And anyway, the conversation just continued for several weeks, maybe even months, and then ultimately they made an offer of senior vice president of strategy and analytics, which I actually think is a really aptly named role for what I like to do and what I'm good at.
And in those conversations with Mandy, what were the telling signs for you to be like, oh, this is, this reaches my expectation, or this is continues to be something I do want to join versus, like how do you almost tell from the initial conversations to being like, I do want to work at this company, if that makes
Yeah,
sense?
yeah. I think at the time, and again, this is, gosh, well over a decade ago now. So my thinking's probably even enhanced since then.
Yeah.
But you do get a chance to meet most of the leadership team when you're interviewing, and I felt that my skill set was complementary and not redundant with everyone I met. And yet I use that term complementary because they had skills that I didn't have, so I would learn and benefit from them too. And it just felt like we would all reinforce each other. And I remember when I left Bain, which was a very difficult thing to do. I still feel like I grew up there, and I'm such good friends with so many people there. But I remember saying when I left, I was like, I think Match needs me. Like I think I can actually make a real difference. And I still feel that way today in terms of the new organizations that I picked. It's kind of symbiotic, if you will.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm so curious as you talk about your experience, and ultimately we'll get to, Aurora, even COO at Istation. I want to know, you mentioned you're goal oriented. What does that look like for you? Is that something, tangibly that you do? Or is it more of like it's something in your mental map that you build?
So I think it was actually Bain that did a training on this, but we used a lot of spreadsheets back then, and they had us write in a spreadsheet, 1 month, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year, 50-year goals. And I still have it, and I reflect on it every now and again. It, I think once you really know and understand your values at their core, they don't change that much. But writing them down is really helpful. And then my husband and I mentioned we met in business school, but we got married on New Year's Eve. And New Year's Eve is one of those really opportune times for reflection. And so every year we go away for New Year's Eve to celebrate our anniversary, but we do kind of a goal reset or setting at that time too. We've now been married, gosh, I think coming up on 19 years. So we've done a number of those. And that's the other thing. You realize that values and goals, especially if you make them you set them at the right level and not this artificial, like, oh, I want to get promoted from, manager to director. That's kind of a silly goal in my mind, in my now wise old age. But
Yeah.
I really want to make an impact on the people I work with. I really want to raise a family that's loving and trusting. If you set that type of goal, they're relatively immutable, and then you're really just optimizing on the margins.
Do you remember what your tenure goal was while at Bain?
Oh, I'm sure it was partner. I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
back then,
Yeah.
it just shows, if anything, the
Yeah.
transition, right? Because
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
then it probably was the role, and
Yeah.
now it's almost transitioned to true values or impact, like you mentioned, which is so fascinating.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
For sure.
And
That
so,
that is an evolution for me. Yeah.
how was that transition going from consulting, right, which is probably not, hands dirty in tech per se, to
Mm-hmm.
then being SVP strategy analytics? Like, what did that transition look like for you? What was the most shocking?
Yeah. It was fun, and it was actually one of the best and softest transitions I would say I could imagine, because I still had strategy in my title, which was something that I've been doing for a decade. And then the analytics function was pretty cool because I was responsible for the media spend and ROI, and we spent over $100 million in marketing back then. So that was a real role with a real responsibility. And then the team structure is a little bit different in corporate America than in consulting as well. And so I think I got a slightly different lens on what it means to manage the same team for multiple years, as opposed to a rotating team across a project. But honestly, part of the reason I left after a couple years was
Yeah.
because I really wanted to get the strategy title out of my role to a true operating experience. And that transition at Match was great to do that, but it also earned me what I would call the street cred to take on a true operating role.
So that's a good segue to ultimately going to iStation for in a COO capacity. What parts is that right?
No, so but I did.
Oh, yeah,
So
please.
yeah, so I actually entered as CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and did that for a year. And they were very pleased. We were well known within Texas, but not outside of it. And they asked me, based on my background and the fact that I had done a fair amount of breadth, if I could take on product development. And I led an agile transformation, which is something that consultants do all the time for our product and engineering teams. But because that was so seamless, product and engineering ended up reporting to me. And that's when I got deputy CO and then CO, and then ultimately actually got sales and HR, and all of the functions ended up ultimately reporting to me by the time I left. And so I think that goes back to, our earlier conversation about seeing a need, leaning in, helping other people. And then,
Yeah,
if it all works, you get handed more work.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So seeing that transition at this stage in your career, you've reached, in my mind, right, like potentially the pinnacle, C-suite exec at a big company. How were you feeling like, were you fulfilled, or did you still say, I want to reach this, I still see this in 5 to 10 years? How are you thinking of your career at that point?
I was very, very happy at iStation, and it did have, we talked about those things I was looking for when I left Bain. It was incredibly mission driven. I know the product that we delivered added tremendous value to so many children. It was in Dallas, it was small. It was really everything that I had hoped for. I think a few things, I got a little restless. I was there for, I think, 8 years. And just like I got a little restless at Bain, after a decade, I wanted to try something new, but I wasn't actually looking when I got the call from Aurora. I wasn't looking at Aurora. I didn't call them; they called me, I should say.
Wow.
But they called me at the right time. I was definitely thinking that maybe I should make a jump into something new, just for the sake of mixing it up.
What are the signals for you that indicate restlessness, right? Or it is time for a shift? Because it seemed like you had the same thing with Bain, as
Mhm.
similar to maybe Match Group and then ultimately iStation. What are those signals that you're like, okay, I need to think about this a bit more?
Yeah, I've thought about it a lot because I don't want to move just because I'm restless. And I actually think that restlessness creeps up at around year 3. And it might be a little bit if you think about high school and things like that. Freshman year is all new and you're starry-eyed and you're learning and everything is new. Sophomore year, you're kind of gaining expertise and people, begin to trust you and lean on you. By junior, you're taking on real leadership positions, in high school, et cetera. And by senior, you're kind of looking at your next thing. What I think about great organizations is they see this within people. And so within Bain, I was able to take on new roles, different responsibilities, new projects. And so the job did continue to change. I think again with slightly diminishing returns, and then same thing with Istation. I went from marketing to product development to lots of these different functions, and so but at some point there just isn't that much more runway unless you're into big mergers and acquisitions and that sort of thing, and that wasn't happening at either Bain or Istation, and so I think those are kind of the hallmarks I look at, but it is something I think about because I don't know that I have a good answer on that.
Yeah. It sounds so simple as you explained it, but I really, really love that framework of even high school, right? Freshman year, sophomore year, like it seems that makes a lot of sense even in the professional world. So I love that. And it seems like as you quote graduate after 4 years, it then becomes a matter of, are there still room for growth and, new opportunities, new projects? And if not, maybe that's a sign for you to leave.
I think that's right, but
Okay.
I reserve the right to change my mind because it's something I don't know that I've totally figured out. And the last thing, I see people jumping jobs a lot these days, and I think jumping just because you're restless probably isn't right either. Yeah.
Yep. Because that's true. Because also, I think over the years, what has changed is 4 years at a job is now 2 years at a job, right? Like now it's almost normal to see people leave after 2 years and find their next thing. But maybe I don't know. There's pros and cons to that, but it's super interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading an article just the other day that it says it takes about 2 years to truly form trust between individuals. And I thought that was an interesting statistic. I don't know if that's true or not. I feel like sometimes you begin to trust people within minutes. But I thought it was an interesting stat that if you take a broad population of strangers, it takes 2 years before they begin to trust each other. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about Aurora. As I said, you're the president. First, what is Aurora? What do you guys do? And then let's go from there.
Yeah, Aurora is making the technology that helps cars and trucks drive themselves. So we're excited. Our mission is to bring the benefits of self-driving to the world safely, quickly, and broadly.
One thing on that I want to mention is you mentioned how what was super exciting about Match Group even is that inflection point and staying in tech. And it seems like, right, Aurora, what you guys are building is ultimately at its core a true inflection point. Was that something that came into consideration, and how important was that for you in joining your next company?
100%. I mean, they seem like they're unrelated industries in a way, but when I joined Match, which I think was back in 2012, 2013, that was before dating apps were ubiquitous. Tinder had just been incubated within Match. And so it went from being a technology that I fundamentally believe could transform the way we live our lives to being just that, right? Now I think 50% of relationships start online. I then moved into education technology, again, believing that this technology could profoundly change the way we learn. And that was pre-COVID. Then COVID hit and we hit this massive inflection point where every student experienced ed tech, for better or worse, but certainly we could see the power of technology and education in a way that wasn't visible in the 20 teens and or the early teens, and now with self-driving, it's one of those technologies that I'm convinced we're certainly convinced we're closer than ever is a when and not an if, and so I look forward to seeing this inflection point as well.
It seems like if someone wants to quote live in the future and see what that looks like, I think they need to be around you. It seems like you have a really great ability to project where we're going towards, which is it's super compelling. So tell me a little bit about your role. What does it mean to be president of a public company that's worth close to $7 billion. Tell me about your day to day. What does that look like?
Yeah. So there's several functions that do roll into me just for context. So marketing and communications, government relations, all of our commercial operations, which means our trucking operations on the road here in Texas. And right now, human resources and legal start rolling into me, as well as our business development or sales team. So a lot of functions that roll into me. And I think one of the reasons Chris and team like me is because I did have experience running all of those functions previously. So while the industry was new to me, the functions were not. And there's a ton of pattern overlap, if you will, and when it comes to leadership and managing teams.
Yeah. You mentioned all of these different industries. First, dating, education, and now self driving technology. These are very different in many ways. What does learning look like for you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I get asked that all the time. I think Bain taught me well because you could get a call Sunday at 7 and on Monday morning be in front of a client that you may have very little knowledge of. And so I learned very quickly. I love to read, right? And so read everything that's publicly available. Everything's maybe an overstatement, but certainly anything the company has put out, press releases, 10Ks, public filings, anything that's online, podcasts, speaking engagements, etc. That takes time, but it doesn't take that much time if you look at company published documents. Then there's industry published documents. So these are the broader podcasts, books, experts, etc. And so there's a lot of independent reading, weekends and nights spent doing that, and I still do it. I'm almost 2 years in now at Aurora, not quite, and I'm still finding new podcasts and new things to read all the time on the industry. But then I think the other thing that's super important is listening. And I think I've gained a bit of a reputation for
Mm,
going on listening tours. And I try to go both broad across many different functions in the organization and deep. And I find that if you do a really good job listening, both to what's going well and what could be even better, the organization already knows what, where you need to lean in, and you take those two things together, getting well read on what you're getting into, and then creating, I think, hope, an embodiment of trust with the people that you're listening to, that you're looking out for them. Those two factors combined lead to you being able to make good decisions and prioritize your time wisely.
and you mentioned listening tour. Is that a thing, or is that something that you created?
I don't know. I've been using it for so long that I don't know where it came from. Um, I think for me, it started when I was at Istation because I went from marketing and then I had to lean into product and engineering as my next step. And how do you do that with any sort of credibility? And I remember I got a real compliment from one of the engineers back in the day. He's like, I really like talking with you because I really only need to tell you once, and I can tell you've heard it, and I don't need to repeat it. And so I do. When I'm really listening and I'm new, I do handwrite. I find the kinetic learning that comes from handwriting is very, very beneficial. And then I know I'm kind of up on the learning curve when I no longer need to write it by hand because I've already got what I would call a filing mechanism in my brain on where it's going to land.
Wow, I love that. I want to know more. What does the dynamic look like from president to C-suite executives? What is that dynamic? How do you work together? How does that come into play?
Yeah, our executive leadership team is very tight, and I believe the sign of a really good team is one that can disagree vehemently and still, have beers and hug it out and laugh in the very next moment. And I think that's really what we've built here at Aurora. We're doing really hard work, difficult things that have never been done before, and you wouldn't want a team that never disagreed. And so I really enjoy the spirited debates that we have, but also the trust that everyone's coming from a good place. We're all
Yeah.
trying to do the right thing for Aurora, even if we have slightly different lenses on what that looks like.
Yeah, I love that. So, Osa, as you know, it's called She Leads for a reason. And I would love to know, being a woman as a president of a public tech company, and even reflecting throughout your entire journey as we just did, were there moments where you felt because you were a woman that maybe you had to push further, or you had some sense of imposter syndrome? And if so, like, how did you kind of get past that?
Yeah, it's so funny. I think I'm a little bit odd and different, and maybe it's because of my parents, and my dad only had two daughters. Um, but I've never ever felt that I couldn't do almost anything that a man could do, and in fact was encouraged to take on, I think, what was historically considered fairly male-dominated industries, from investment banking, even consulting. There weren't that many female partners back when I joined. I think it's different now. And then leaning into technology. So I personally haven't felt that, and I haven't felt judged because I'm a woman. I will say the one thing that is a little bit different, and probably the first time I experienced gender roles, was motherhood, and that was kind of fun to work through with my husband because he had grown up in a very traditional family where his mom had not worked and his dad did, and so when we first had Anna, and I took maternity leave, it was clear that certain things stopped happening. So he stopped taking his dry cleaning in, assuming that I would do it now. Uh, and that this is, I think, a testament to a very strong marriage and a strong relationship. I had to work up the guts to tell him, hey, this isn't how it's going to work. And
Yeah.
I am going back to work. And he is now one of the most, 50-50 parents that I could ever imagine. We share that workload immensely, tremendously, and have to. And I think he's gotten great satisfaction and from leaning in a little bit more to the fatherhood role. So that's
Yeah.
probably my most gender-based experience, less so in the
Yeah.
workplace. Yeah.
No, I love that. And I'm so happy you mentioned that because I think it's quite, pertinent to many, many women who are mothers, who want to work, who are in leadership roles. And what I will say as well is even having, I think that same mindset that you mentioned of transitioning from the I, me to the we, us, I think that could actually be applied to the same being a woman versus a man. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter, and I'm just here and being a part of it. I deserve to be here. So I think there's like that, again, that mental shift, which is so powerful.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way you phrase that.
Yeah. So I want to know what is the most significant thing you've changed your mind about over the past decade?
Yeah, I think the way we carry unconscious bias and stereotypes, and what I mean by that is I married a Texan, that's why we're in Dallas now. His love for Texas may not be rational, but it is real. And I've learned to love Texas too. It's great. We're very happy here. We've been here about 15 years. But when I moved from Northern California to Texas, I realized Californians have a ton of stereotypes about Texas. I did myself. And Texans have a bunch of stereotypes about Californians, to name a few. And what's so silly about that is it prevents us from really getting to know one another. And there are wonderful, fabulous people throughout both states, obviously. And yet I continually run into people who are like, oh, what's Texas like? And even stereotypes about Sweden, things like that. And I, 10 years is probably not enough time, but 15 years ago, I would say I probably held more of those stereotypes than I'd like to admit. And now I work really, really hard to acknowledge that I may have unconscious bias, and to not ignore that, but to really work through it.
Ooh, that's a good one. I like that. I think many people can also adopt that, which is great. Okay, my other two more questions for you. One is, if you had the power to assign a book to everyone on earth to read and really truly understand it, which book would you choose?
Yeah. My favorite book of all times is Unbroken by Laura Hillenbrand.
Such a good book. I literally sent it to my friend last night saying you need to read this. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And I remember reading that book and thinking, I will never, ever again feel sorry for myself in my entire life. It's a great lesson in how to persevere, how to put life in perspective, um, how to understand the human condition. And so, yes, I can't say enough good things about it.
That's amazing. Oh, so what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
The art of influence. I think as
Ooh.
ooh, yes. No, look, as an executive, you have a lot of decision rights. And so it's easy, it can become easy, can feel easy to make a decision. But if you're not influencing people along the way, either people who then, ideally go and execute that decision, or rather, I mean, I guess I work with a team of executives. They have certain decision rights too. And if I can't influence or persuade or make my case, then I'm not very effective. And it actually holds in personal life as well. I have two teenage daughters, and sure, there's certain rules we put in place, but the biggest gift I think I have as a mom is being able to subtly influence how they think and view the world. Obviously, their decisions on what they take away and what they don't, but influence can't be underestimated.
Given that, what is the best either advice you've listened to, heard, or read, or whatever it may be? What is something around influence that you've taken into your own approach?
Yeah, so there's two books that I recommend to anyone who's curious to learn more. One is literally called Influence. I think it's called Influence, the Art of Persuasion. It's pretty well known. The other
Yeah.
one is called Thank You for Arguing. And it talks a little bit about how you can disagree and still be agreeable, but it goes back really to Aristotle, and it goes back to trust. And I think more when I was more junior in my career, because I was fairly analytical and I do math and logic, and I would just explain something very logically. And if you go back to Aristotle's teaching, he would suggest that even the best data and the best logic won't be accepted if it's not trusted. And so you need a shared ethos, which is a commonality that this person might actually be looking out for me. Shared ethos that leads to trust, and then trust leads to influence. And so I still enjoy solving problems with data. I will never not enjoy that, but I spend a lot more of my time developing a shared ethos and understanding of shared state, and making sure that I communicate, even if it's not explicitly, implicitly, that I'm doing this for the better of the whole. Because if they don't believe where you're coming from, they're not going to believe what you're saying.
Oh, that's a great way to end it. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on She Leads. First of all, I've just admired your entire journey from literally growing up in Sweden, moving to America, and then ultimately where you are today. It's really inspiring. So thank you. Thank you for coming on the pod.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.